candidate. Take a new poll showing her lagging behind possible Republican candidate Chris Christie. And Republican Senator Tom Coburn calls out Congress and federal agencies for wasteful spending. But how much of his annual Wastebook report was much ado about nothing? These are the topics for our agenda panel today. Corey Dade is a contributing editor for The Root. Sabrina Siddiqui is a politics reporter for The Huffington Post. And Michael Tomasky is a special correspondent for Newsweek and The Daily Beast and also editor of the journal Democracy. And gang, we're physically all in the same space, but we are separated by floors and a little studio distance.
But separate Michael, let me start. Thomas, separate but
yes, equal. Exactly. But Michael, let me start with you. The new Iowa poll conducted by Quinnipiac University, it shows Chris Christie with a 5-point lead. So for those people in a Hillary Clinton presidential camp, presumably, should worriers in that camp look at this and question the strength of Chris Christie?
Yeah, I think this poll is something for Hillary Clinton partisans to worry about, Thomas. And it's not just a standalone number. I've seen other polls from purple states, Colorado, Ohio, and so on, that show Christie competitive with her or ahead of her. There's a little paradox here that I can't quite put my finger on. You know, she's the most admired woman in America for 17 of the last 20 years. She left the State Department with an approval rating in the mid-70s, and yet, as a potential presidential candidate, can't quite make the sale with independent voters, among whom Christie led her in this poll. So she's got some work to do there with independent voters, despite her high personal standing.
Okay, so let's look at that specifically, Corey, with the independents and the breakdown of this poll, because it would suggest Chris Christie leading Clinton by 9 points in the independent area. We also see a pretty significant gender gap here. Hillary Clinton leading with women voters by nearly 20%, Chris Christie leading male voters by 12 points. So how concerned should both parties be about these numbers? And let's just remember who won Iowa during the Republican primary before. That was a Rick Santorum.
Right. I think between the two parties, I think the Democrats should be a little bit more worried about the fact that they are trailing, or at least Hillary was trailing by 9 percentage points in this poll. That, I think, is a reverberation from, you know, the Republicans' continued attacks on Obamacare in particular. But I think, you know, as we go forward, you know, the more we learn about Chris Christie as he continues to be vetted now over the next year and some change by the media, by Democrats, the more those poll numbers will start to fluctuate. He will start to slip a little bit at different points. He will start to go up. I think for Republicans, they're not surprised that Hillary has such a commanding lead among women, and they will, you know, they would continue to try to close that gap over time. But let's remember, this is Iowa, and this is where once upon a time Michelle Bachmann was leading in the polls. And, you know, she's the hometown girl, and she was supposed to take Iowa. So let's take it with a grain of salt for now. But these are really important indicators going forward.
But certainly, for Sabrina, let me ask you this, because moderate Republicans would look at this and be excited because someone like Chris Christie can resonate in Iowa, as Corey points out, where Michelle Bachmann led the way, where Rick Santorum ultimately beat Mitt Romney there. So that has to be encouraging to people that want to see a rebranding and a face that can lead that for the GOP.
It is encouraging for moderate Republicans who want to see Chris Christie as the nominee. You have probably about 10 potential candidates in the GOP field, and Chris Christie faces similar challenges compared to those faced by Mitt Romney in 2012 in terms of winning over conservatives. Conservatives would much rather see a Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, or Marco Rubio on the ticket. Now, the reality is that poll after poll has shown that it's actually Chris Christie who poses the greatest threat to Hillary Clinton's candidacy, and I think that this certainly is just another indicator that he would be the most likely nominee, and moderates will work, I think, with establishment Republicans to try and make sure that Chris Christie is the nominee, because in reality, you might have someone like Ted Cruz or Rand Paul standing, you know, in the way up until the very end, but Chris Christie on a national level seems to be still the most electable GOP candidate.
All right, gang, I want to switch gears now to Senator Coburn's new report. Waste management, or wasteful spending, of nearly $30 million in Washington, D.C. He's been compiling this annual report for 5 years or so. But among the examples that he lists are the popular romance project at a price tag of $914,000, $325,000 study by the NIH at how a wife's reaction during conflict plays a role in happy marriages. Okay. Sabrina, what do you make of this report and how it, I guess, expands the debate of wasteful spending, deficit reduction as we lead into the debt ceiling?
Well, I think that Tom Coburn certainly gets credit for consistency. He's, a small government guy. He puts out this report every year, and he doesn't care if the spending is supported or has been put in place by Democrats or Republicans. He simply believes that it's wasteful and believes that there's a smarter way, of course, to put in place cuts versus, of course, sequestration, which is another piece that is talked about in the budget deal and has been, at least some of the effects have been mitigated for the next 2 years. What this actually also, I think, brings to bear is the idea of meaningful deficit reduction and how committed I think both parties are to reducing the debt and the deficit. You don't really see them going through the budget, sort of combing through all of this spending and identifying where there might be, in fact, wasteful spending. I don't think that everything in Coburn's report might be wasteful. I bet, especially with respect to some of the scientific studies, often you'll have the NIH or the National Science Foundation defend those studies and say, there's a lot to learn about aging, about disease like Alzheimer's from these studies. But certainly, I think, again, Tom Coburn out again with his report gets points for, once again, highlighting that a lot of the members of Congress who talk about deficit reduction, they don't actually follow up and really try to bring to bear wasteful spending.
Michael, what's your take? Do you think that Tom Coburn gets credit for that? I mean, obviously, Sabrina says that this money is invested, certainly some of it wisely, although I think NASA spent $125,000 on a 3D printer to make pizzas, which we have ovens that make pizzas, but does he get points for that?
Oh, I suppose, but what's $125,000? Honestly, what's $30 million in the scheme of the federal budget? It's something, but, look, Thomas, I think a lot of these studies are probably, when you really look into them, they're easy to make fun of on television, the titles of them. But I would imagine something important is learned in a lot of these, in a lot of this research, and I think the government probably should fund research into what makes a happy marriage. I don't have a difficulty with that. I don't think Tom Coburn, I don't think Republicans, conservatives should have an issue with that. I thought they were.
You can't put a price tag on a happy marriage, Michael. You can't put a price tag on a happy marriage.
Well, the government can.
Corey, let me leave it with you. Much ado about nothing, or is this a great way to display areas of wasteful spending that Americans need to know about? And as Michael points out, some of these things, they do make sense, but as we look at them collectively, they do leave us scratching our head for some.
Any research on marriages is money well spent as far as I'm concerned, Thomas. But this is not necessarily wasteful spending because there are explanations, behind a great deal of them. I think it just continues the conservative debate. It's one of the few bits of proof, quote-unquote proof, that conservatives use to keep their base exercised and keep them engaged and angry at government.
Gang, thanks so much. The Roots' Corey Dade, the Huffington Post, Sabrina Siddiqui, and Michael Tomasky from the Daily Beast. Great to see all of you guys. If I don't see you before, have a great holiday. Merry Christmas to you all.